Chapter 1. The Weight of a Word. The first word I ever remember saying did not feel like a word of all. It felt like a bruise, thick, stubborn, lodged somewhere between my chest and my teeth. Everyone told me it was a triumph. My mother cried. My father clapped too loudly. The speech therapist wrote something on her clipboard and smiled like she was witnessing a small miracle. But inside my body, it felt like I had tried to lift something much heavier than I was meant to, a boulder with syllables carved into it. I don't remember the word itself. I remember the strain. I remember the way the room smelled, disinfectant and old carpet, crayons too, a waxy, dusty sweetness that clung to my fingers. The speech room was at the far end of the school hallway, next to the boiler room, as if sound itself was an afterthought. The fluorescent lights hummed and buzzed overhead, a thin mechanical whine that filled the silences I could not. The therapist, her name was Mrs. Keller, but I could not say it then, had a stack of picture cards, a ball, a dog, a tree, a baby. Each one laminated, the edges too sharp for small fingers. She would hold them up, one by one, and wait. Ball, she'd say slowly, like she was unspooling the sound in front of me. Ball. Her mouth was a shape I could not make, round, then wide. Her tongue touched her teeth in a way mine refused to understand. I'd feel my own tongue, this heavy animal in my mouth, slow to wake up, confused by every instruction. I knew the word. I always knew the word. Inside, there was no gap, no stutter. Inside, the word was clean, quick, alive. In my head, it rolled out. Ball, ball, ball. But the moment I opened my mouth, something happened. The sound snagged. It hit some invisible net just behind my teeth. My jaw tensed, my lips tried to shape it, and what came out was a broken echo of intention. The consonant crowded the doorway, piling up, each burr crashing into the next. My throat tightened, my chest burned. I could feel my pulse in my tongue. Mrs. Keller leaned closer. "Take your time," she said. "You can do it." That was the soundtrack of my childhood. Take your time. You can do it. As if time was the only problem. As if the word wasn't a weight I had to drag up a steep hill every single time I opened my mouth. Sometimes, when I tried to push through, saliva gathered in the corners of my lips, and I could feel heat rising in my face. My eyes would sting. The more I wanted the word out, the heavier it became. Out in the hallway, children's voices rose and fell in easy patterns. Laughter bounced off the lockers. Someone shouted another kid's name, casually, effortlessly, tossing it like a ball across the distance. Names were the worst. When the roll call came in kindergarten, I waited for my name to become a battlefield. I knew the order, knew which kids came before me. Jacob, Kelly, Logan. Then the pause. My turn. There's a particular kind of silence that shows up in classrooms just before someone expects you to speak. It has edges. It presses against your skin. You can feel every eye tipping toward you, feel the teacher's head turning with the weight of expectation. Inside, I said my name smoothly, a quiet, perfect sound. In reality, I opened my mouth and stepped straight into quicksand. The first breath was wrong. My throat closed too early. The second breath shook. Faces started to blur in front of me. I could see my own hands on the desk, knuckles turning white from how hard I was gripping the wood. The teacher tried to help. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can..." It felt like my entire body had narrowed down to this single impossible task. Get the word out. Just one. Just the name you've been hearing your whole life. The other kids were used to it, but used to it didn't mean kind. Some watched with mild curiosity, like they were waiting for a magic trick that never quite worked. Some looked away, embarrassed for me, as if my speech was a shirt stained with something I couldn't see. A few smirked, already learning that difference is something to measure and rank. When I finally wrestled the sounds into the shape of my name, it came out chopped, breathless, like something dragged over gravel. The teacher smiled with relief. "There you go," as if I had just figured out the combination to a stubborn lock, instead of clawing my way out of something that wanted to swallow me whole. In the speech room, they made it into a game. We blew bubbles to practice breath control. I watched them swell on the plastic ring, shimmering, thin as a promise, then drift into the air. The trick, they said, was gentle, steady air. Not too hard, not too soft. Like speech. My bubbles always burst too fast, or not at all. A film clinging to the ring, refusing to become anything. We used mirrors. "That's you," Mrs. Keller would say, guiding my chair closer to the wall where a wide, smudged mirror waited. "Watch your mouth when you talk." I hated that mirror. It held every failed attempt, every half-formed syllable. I'd stare at my reflection, at a small boy whose lips seemed foreign to him. Mrs. Keller would stand behind me, her hand hovering over my shoulder, not quite touching. "Look at how my mouth moves," she'd say, appearing in the mirror beside me. "Now you try." She made the sounds again. Her lips glided from one shape to another. My own mouth tried to follow, but there was always a lag, a disconnect between command and movement. Inside, everything was fluid. Outside, everything was static. The world likes words that behave. When words fall out of other people's mouths, they do it in straight lines. Sentences arrive on time. Jokes have clear punchlines. Questions don't trip over their own beginnings. In my body, words took detours. They hit wrong turns. They got stuck. In first grade, there was a boy who sat 2 desks over from me. His name was Ethan, and his voice was smooth as water. He raised his hand constantly. The teacher used him as an example. "Listen to how clearly Ethan answers," she'd say. He'd stand, no hesitation, and let the answer pour out. Even when he was wrong, he sounded confident. His errors looked charming, forgivable. Mine, on the other hand, looked like defects. I learned quickly that the world will forgive what it understands. It is less patient with what it has to wait for. At home, my mother tried to make speech practice less clinical. We sat at the kitchen table, a yellowed laminate surface that always smelled faintly of dish soap and onions. She'd cut my food into small, careful pieces and then pull out the worksheet that Mrs. Keller had sent home. "Just 10 minutes, she'd say gently. "Then you can go play." 10 minutes became an hour. Not because she forced it, but because every word was a hill, and hills take time. She tapped the page with her fingernail. "Say this one." The word looked simple enough. Cat. In my mind, it was immediate. Cat. A fast, light step of a word. I could see the animal itself. Whiskers, tail, a flick of disinterest. Out loud, it felt like rocks. K, k. My jaw clenched. I pushed air, but it came out in bursts. My tongue lurched toward the roof of my mouth, then retreated in confusion. She smiled at me, but there was sadness in it. Not pity exactly. Something quieter. A grief for the thing she couldn't fix. "You're doing so well," she murmured. I wasn't. We both knew it. But love likes to name struggle as progress. It makes it softer to hold. My father handled it differently. He was a practical man who believed everything could be repaired with enough time and effort. Engines, leaky faucets, broken fences. He thought speech worked the same way. "If you slow down," he would say, "the words won't get tangled." He meant well. I tried. One evening, he leaned across the table with a notepad. "Let's write it first," he suggested. "If you can write it, you can say it." So I wrote. The pencil felt safe. Lead scratched across paper in steady lines, no stutter, no pause. Ball, cat, tree, daddy. The letters sat clean and obedient in a row. No one had to wait for them. No one filled in the gaps for them. On the page, nothing interrupted me. Then he tapped a word. "Now say it." I tried. The distance between knowing and speaking was still there, a wide gap I could not say out loud. He sighed, just once. A small sound, but I heard it. Children are experts in tiny disappointments. Again. Each repetition made the word heavier. Ball became a stone. Daddy became a mountain. Sometimes, sitting at that table, I felt anger rise in me, hot and choking, at the words, at my tongue, at everything inside me that refused to work on command. I wouldn't have called it anger then. I would have just known that my chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with breath and everything to do with being trapped. Because that's what it felt like most days. Trapped. Not in a room. In a sentence I couldn't finish. There were moments when I thought maybe it was all in my head. Maybe if I tried hard enough, I could break whatever invisible barrier stood between intention and sound. So I tried harder. In second grade, we had to read aloud in front of the class. The teacher went down each row, one student at a time, a paragraph each. I watched the pattern move closer, that inevitable approach of my turn. My heart matched the ticking of the clock on the wall. Hands damp, fingers slipping on the pages, I traced the words ahead of time, practicing silently, mouth moving without sound, rehearsing. When the teacher said my name, the air in the room felt thin. My eyes locked on the first sentence. I knew all the words. I had just heard them from the boy in front of me. I opened my mouth. Nothing. The class waited. A few kids shifted in their seats. One coughed. I felt the panic start, small at first, then expanding fast. My throat closed tighter. The letters on the page blurred. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "Go ahead," the teacher prompted. "You're okay." That made it worse. Being watched and reassured is its own kind of suffocation. I forced a sound out, any sound. It came out jumbled, the beginning of a word slammed into the middle of another. Laughter, quick and sharp, broke out from somewhere to my left. Someone slapped a hand over their mouth too late. Someone else hissed, "Shh," but it didn't matter. My face burned. I felt like I was standing naked in the middle of the room, holding a word I had broken in front of everyone. The teacher cut in, her voice firm. "That's enough. I'll read this part." Relief and shame arrived together. Relief because the sentence no longer belonged to me. Shame because I had lost it so publicly. In the speech room later that week, I tried to explain it to Mrs. Keller with the small vocabulary I had for emotions. "It gets stuck," I said, dragging the word as I described it. "Here." I pressed my fingers to my throat. She nodded thoughtfully. "It feels stuck," she said carefully, "but your muscles are just working differently. We're going to help them learn a new way." A new way. That was the promise dangled in front of me year after year, that if I worked hard enough, if I repeated enough syllables into enough mirrors under enough fluorescent lights, I would learn a new way to speak. But no one ever said what would happen to me if I didn't. On the playground, language was a currency. The fast talkers ruled. They negotiated games, told jokes, argued rules with ease. They traded insults, compliments, secrets. Sentences ricocheted between them like marbles, bright and loud. I hovered at the edges, wanting to step in, knowing the cost. There was a game of tag one afternoon. A boy called out teams, listing names quickly, dividing us into two groups. Someone asked, "What about him?" and pointed at me. The boy shrugged. "He's too slow," he said. He meant my body, my voice, both. I knew I could run as fast as them. I just couldn't say it as fast as they could dismiss me. So I stayed near the fence, hands in my pockets, watching dust collect on my shoes as I scuffed them back and forth. Words stacked up inside me, arguments, protests, jokes I wanted to make but couldn't shape in time. Sometimes, in those moments, I would mutter them under my breath, quiet enough that no one could hear. And there they were, smooth, whole. It was the pressure of being heard that broke them. One day, in a session, Mrs. Keller asked me something that startled me. "If you could wake up tomorrow and speak perfectly, what would be the first thing you'd say?" I stared at the picture cards on the table. Ball, tree, cat, dog, sun, mom. The safe little universe they'd built for me. But my mind went somewhere else. It went to all the times I had been interrupted, laughed at, spoken over. It went to roll call, to the classroom reading circle, to the playground fence. I'd say, I began, tripping over the "s" like a stone in the road. I swallowed, tried again. I'd say, wait. She tilted her head. Wait? I nodded. Why wait? Because that was what I needed from the world. Just a few more seconds before they finished my sentence for me, before they decided what I meant, before they assumed my silence was emptiness instead of effort. But I couldn't explain that, not then. All I could manage was, "People, don't." "Don't what?" she asked gently. Don't wait." She was quiet for a long time after that. When I was 8, I began to notice that adults talked around me as if I weren't there, even when I was. "He's smart," they'd say to each other. "He just has trouble expressing himself." Just. That word stung more than they realized, as if the only thing separating me from everyone else was a minor inconvenience. I wanted to tell them that trouble expressing oneself is not a just. It is a constant knocking on a door that doesn't open. It is watching your own thoughts gather dust. My mother took me to yet another specialist that year, a newer office this time, blue walls, softer chairs, a waiting room with magazines instead of outdated coloring books. The doctor had kind eyes, but he spoke quickly, like everyone else. He asked me to repeat phrases, to name objects, to count aloud. "Again," he would say. "Good. Again." I learned something in that room. Repetition does not guarantee improvement. Sometimes it only deepens the groove of your frustration. After the appointment, in the car, my mother asked what I thought of him. I shrugged. I started, then stopped, exhausted already. "Took a lot of notes," I finally managed. She laughed a little, tired. "Yeah," she said, "he did." What I didn't have the words for yet was this. Everyone wanted to diagnose my speech. No one asked what it felt like. It felt like standing behind a glass wall, watching my own mouth move on the other side, knowing exactly what I wanted to say, feeling it ripple through my mind, sharp and articulate, only to see it smear against the barrier as soon as it tried to cross. Year after year, the world taught me its priorities. In classrooms, the loudest voices got the most attention. In group work, the quickest answers were the most valued. At family gatherings, the stories that tumbled out rapidly were the ones that drew laughter, nods, approval. Fluency was not just a skill, it was a kind of social permission slip. You could be wrong as long as you sounded confident. You could be cruel as long as you sounded smooth. Meanwhile, I sat in corners, at the edges of circles, on the perimeter of conversations, holding entire monologues inside my head with no way to convince anyone they existed. People mistook my silence for emptiness, for shyness, for simplicity. What they couldn't see was that every quiet moment was crowded. Words pressed against the inside of my skull, pacing, waiting. They weren't delicate. They weren't broken. They were whole, restless, impatient. If you had listened carefully, if you had sat with me in the pauses instead of filling them, you might have heard them. But the world is afraid of silence. It rushes to fill it. So I began to learn something no therapist ever wrote down in my file. I began to learn that words aren't just sounds. They're status. They're control. When you can't move them freely from inside to outside, you start to understand exactly how heavy they are. You see the way other people throw them around, careless, like confetti. You watch teachers cut off students mid-sentence, bosses interrupt employees, parents talk over children, friends finish each other's thoughts. Everyone's stepping on everyone else's language without a second thought. And you think, you don't know how lucky you are to waste words like that. By the time I was 10, speech therapy was less about learning sounds and more about learning how to live with the fact that they did not come easily. The room changed, the therapists changed, the exercises changed, but the feeling remained the same, a small, clinical space where I was both subject and problem. Again, they'd say, slower, breathe, try that one more time. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. On the days when I was tired, I would stare at the picture cards without speaking at all. The therapists would wait, patient but determined, and I could feel their eyes on me, measuring the distance between what they believed I could do and what I was willing to attempt. In those silences, a strange thing began to happen. Inside, my thoughts grew sharper. I began to narrate everything in my head, as if I were speaking fluently to an invisible audience that never interrupted. When the therapist asked, "What's this?" holding up the card with the tree, outwardly I might say nothing. Inwardly I would think, it's a tree, obviously. Not just a tree, but the kind with bark that flakes under your fingernails, leaves that rattle like paper when they're dry. It looks like the big one behind our house that leans a little to the left because of the storms. When my classmates ran past me on the playground, calling each other names, I'd think, I have better words than those, you just don't get to hear them. The more the world labeled me as quiet, slow, delayed, the louder everything became inside. No one prepares you for that. For the split life of a child whose interior voice and exterior voice refuse to line up. Speech therapy taught me how to move my lips, my tongue, my breath. It did not teach me how to carry the weight of all the words that never made it out. So I learned to live with that weight myself. I carried it down hallways, into classrooms, onto playgrounds. I carried it home, to the kitchen table, to my bedroom, where the only conversations that flowed without effort were the ones I had silently, staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling. Lying there in the dark, I would replay the day. Moments when I should have answered faster, should have stepped in, should have said something instead of letting the laughter move on without me. In those private rewinds, I always spoke perfectly. No stutter, no block, no hitch. Every word glided out of me in one clean motion. It was a cruel mercy, that inner fluency. Proof that I was not empty. Proof that I could speak, just not on the terms the world demanded. I didn't know it then, but the question had already begun to form, quiet and insistent. If a thought is never heard, does it still count as real? In a world that worshipped fluency, that treated speech as both identity and proof of intelligence, where did that leave someone like me? A boy with perfect sentences locked inside. A child who knew, before he had words for it, that a single spoken word could weigh more than the whole room, and that some of us spent our entire childhood lifting.